Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why you can't stop thinking about that embarrassing thing you did in 6th grade, even though you know it is totally illogical, or maybe why you just know that feeling hungry leads to wanting food? Well, this new study dives deep into how our minds work, suggesting we have two very different ways of understanding ourselves and others. They found we have these separate mental blueprints or theories for how things connect. So, the big question this paper tries to answer is this: how can we hold two seemingly opposite ideas at the same time? On one hand, we feel like our mind is this special, maybe even separate thing from our physical body, like, my thoughts aren't made of the same stuff as my arm, right? But on the other hand, we totally expect our minds to make our bodies do things, like thinking about pizza makes me want to go get some pizza. How do we keep these two ideas, that minds are distinct and that they interact in our heads together? The researchers proposed a really interesting idea. They think it is because we have two different kinds of causal knowledge. Imagine it like two different toolboxes in our brains. One toolbox is for understanding the origins of our abilities. So we have a mind that gives us the ability to remember and think. We have a body that gives us the ability to feel tired or hungry. These are like the fundamental sources of our capacities. The second toolbox is for understanding how specific events link up in a chain, one causing the other. So remembering something might make you feel hungry, or seeing a dog might make you decide to pet it. These are the sequences, the cause and effect pathways between specific events. They tested this idea with 6 experiments involving about 670 adults. In the first experiment, they asked people to group 15 different things like seeing, thinking, reaching for something, feeling pain, getting tired into categories. They found that people naturally put mental events together, actions together, and bodily feelings together. It's like they saw these 3 areas as separate. But here is where it gets really interesting. When they then asked people about how these things caused each other, the participants' answers crossed those boundaries freely. For example, even though sitting and jumping were grouped together as actions, people didn't think sitting causes jumping, but they did think mental events, like seeing something, could cause bodily events, like feeling hungry. This showed the two different ways of thinking, one about distinct categories' origins, and one about how things actually connect chains. Then, in the next 5 experiments, they dug into why we use these two different systems. They wanted to see how these two ways of thinking causal origins and causal chains help us understand other people in everyday situations. They found that when people are trying to explain something, predict what might happen next, or even try to make something happen, they tend to use the causal chain toolbox. For example, if you want to explain why someone is jumping, you'd say because they saw something exciting. That is a chain of events. But when people are asked to make broader guesses, like figuring out what kind of abilities a new creature might have just based on one characteristic, or trying to understand the biological basis of a behavior, they lean on the causal origins toolbox. It is like they're looking for the underlying, fundamental reason for that ability. Think about it this way. If you see a new type of bird, and it has a really long beak, you might assume it eats nectar because you know long beaks are connected to nectar eating. That is using the causal origin of the beak to infer something about its diet. But if you see a bird pecking at a flower, you might predict it is going to eat nectar next. That is, using a causal chain, pecking leads to eating. So, what does this all mean? It means our common sense understanding of people isn't just one messy pile of ideas. Instead, we have these two distinct but working together systems for making sense of the world. One tells us that minds, bodies, and actions are separate categories, and the other tells us how specific events within and across those categories can actually influence each other. This helps us do things like understand that someone's belief can cause them to act, or that their physical tiredness can influence their mood. It's a pretty sophisticated system that allows us to have these seemingly contradictory beliefs simultaneously. The researchers emphasize that this isn't just about abstract philosophical ideas of mind-body dualism. It is about how our everyday minds are actually structured to handle social information. They found that these two systems are flexible. For example, in one experiment, people could use either causal chains or causal origins to plan how to make something happen, depending on the situation. This shows that both are real, usable causal beliefs. Now, let's talk about the methods briefly. They had participants do tasks like sorting items, rating causal connections, explaining events, predicting outcomes, and even imagining they were wizards or scientists. They used something called representational similarity analysis, which is basically a fancy way of looking at how people mentally group things and then comparing it to how they thought those things were connected causally. They used statistics like p-values to make sure their findings weren't just random chance. A p-value is like a flukometer. The lower it is, the less likely the result is just a random fluke. In this paper, they often reported p-values less than 0.001, which is super low, meaning they're very confident in their results. One of the really neat parts of this study is how they conducted it. They pre-registered their experiments, meaning they laid out exactly what they planned to do and test before they even started collecting data. This helps prevent researchers from changing their plans based on the results, which makes the findings more trustworthy. They also made all their data, stimuli, and analysis scripts publicly available. This is awesome for transparency and allows other researchers to check their work or build upon it. You can even find demos of the experiments online. Now, like any study, this one has some limits. They only looked at 15 specific events, and we all know human experience is way more complex than that. They also focused on US adults, and how people think about minds and bodies can vary across cultures. So, while this gives us a fantastic map, it is not the whole territory. So, what is the big takeaway? This research suggests that our common sense understanding of people is built on two fundamental causal frameworks, one that sorts things into categories like mind, body, and action, the causal origins, and another that connects specific events in a sequence, the causal chains. This dual system allows us to see both the distinct nature of our mental and physical selves and the intricate ways they interact. It is a powerful example of how our brains build complex, and even seemingly contradictory, models of the world to help us navigate our social lives more effectively. This is like understanding that your car is a machine made of metal and plastic separate origins, but also knowing that pressing the gas pedal makes it go faster, a causal chain. Both are true, and both are crucial for driving. It makes you think about how we learn this stuff. Do we first see them as separate and then learn how they connect, or do we grasp the connection first in a more general way and then refine it? The study hints that even very young children understand the connection between minds and bodies, suggesting this isn't something we learn only later in life. The researchers suggest that we have these two parallel systems for causal beliefs, and they help us maintain the boundaries between mind, body, and biological selves, while also showing us how they interconnect. It's a really elegant way of thinking about how we understand ourselves and others. It is like having a dual operating system for social cognition. Honestly, this research is super exciting because it offers a unified way to think about long-standing puzzles in psychology and philosophy. It suggests that rather than being confused by the mind-body paradox, we're actually built to handle it with these two distinct but complementary causal reasoning systems. It really paints a picture of a more nuanced and flexible human mind. It makes me wonder how this might apply to understanding things like mental health conditions or even artificial intelligence. So, what are your thoughts on these two ways of understanding the mind-body connection? Do you find yourself using causal chains more often for some things and causal origins for others? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to learn more about the fascinating workings of the human mind, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.